So thank you for giving us your time and being here for our talk. Don't be afraid of the scary red error messages. They are actually our friends. We're here to change your minds about failure, how you respond to it, and give you some tips and tools for how to deal with it in your own programming adventures. In my first stand-up with a brand new client, now imagine this client is a very she client, like imagine a lot of Argyle and Tweed. This is what I show them in my first stand-up. It's my turn to share, and I'm like, all right, everybody, this is the big Rails error page I'm currently contending with, and I plan to figure out what's going wrong. And then I stop sharing, and we move on with stand-up. Later, after the meeting, my project manager comes to me and is like, that was amazing. And I'm like, what was? Because I had no idea what he was talking about. He asked, didn't I see that no one else really shared what was going on? Everyone else had basically said no blockers, and we moved on. I was doing things different. See, I grew up as an artist, and so failure has actually been my end goal. Aha, another artist in the crowd, I can tell. So I don't know if many of you know this, but the starving artist stereotype is so pervasive that is what all budding artists are told to expect out of their career. I didn't realize that my unabashed nature when it came to failure would become such a blessing when I became a software engineer. What I've realized over this journey from junior to senior is that the skill of openly sharing one's progress, including the failures, is not common, but it can be taught. In this talk, we'll tackle how to normalize failure, then give you some tips on how to handle them in your own practice. We'll have some time at the end for questions, so if you think of any, please save them till the end. Thanks. Failures, errors, and broken tests are a natural part of the development process. This talk is all about how to embrace them rather than fear them, and how to turn them from hurdles in your path to stepping stones to get you where you want to go. My name is Kait Sewell, and I'm a senior software engineer at scientist.com. We help make digital ideas a reality and are mostly a Rails shop with some React and JavaScript and Docker-based environments. SoftServe is the software consultancy from scientist.com, and we're in a rare opportunity where we're looking to bring on some bigger clients. Scientist.com is a company that helps researchers get science done on demand. And my colleague and I work for the department that helps our clients with their software engineering needs. This is Shana Moore. She's a more experienced senior software engineer, and y'all are lucky to get to listen to her speak later. The first thing I want to do is normalize failure. Handling error messages is just one aspect of dealing with failures in software development. Failures can occur at different levels of the development process, such as design, implementation, testing, or deployment. Dealing with failures effectively requires a mindset that views failures as opportunities for learning and improvement rather than as sources of blame or shame. To conquer this, one must embrace a growth mindset. I want to encourage you to view failures as opportunities for growth rather than as personal flaws or setbacks. A failure is not a waste of time. It is an experience where hopefully you learned something. Even experienced programmers make mistakes, but the key is to learn from the failures and use that knowledge to improve. The problem we have to contend with is that for most people, sharing failure is incredibly uncomfortable. When it comes to what we share openly, it is our highlights in social media that we share, not a trip to the grocery store. This is where we have to recondition ourselves to see failure in a new light. Rewiring your brain is certainly not the easiest thing to do, but it's totally doable. All sorts of books have been written about how to hack your brain and retrain it. What I'm asking from you is to lean into the idea of the cognitive triangle, that if you change your feelings about a thing, you can change your thoughts about a thing. And if you change your thoughts about a thing, you can change your feelings about a thing. And that in turn will change your actions. This talk is about how you respond to failure. It's a thing to be embraced, welcomed, revel in it a couple times if you want. Changing how you feel about failure will take time and effort. It won't happen overnight. The building of this skill will pay off for you when you start to see your progress speed up because you're no longer held back by that fear of making a mistake. Anyways, there is Git history to save you if you really need it. You can always go back to where it was working before and begin the problem-solving process again with new information. Relax in knowing that you can't really break it beyond repair. It's safe to experiment. It's encouraged. Failing will help make you and your code more resilient. In the development of your skills, embracing a growth mindset will set you up for success. I don't remember exactly when, but somewhere in my teens, I decided I liked being wrong. Not only did I like being wrong, it was my new ethos. I liked being proven wrong because it gave me the opportunity to learn something. I don't know what made me realize it, but at the end of it, after the embarrassment, I was smarter at the end than I was at the beginning, before being wrong. And if no one had proved me wrong, I would have just continued being wrong until someone or something else helped me fix it. And that embarrassment of being wrong, it totally dwindles with time and practice and a different outlook. If you want to know more about growth mindsets, definitely check out Carol Dweck's work. Speaking of famous people, this is a small list of celebrities, all of which were not born into fame, but made it happen for themselves even after failing countless times. Except for Edison. He counted. These are people who worked really hard to get their levels of success. Even Edison, who was a litigious jerk, could reframe failure as a learning experience. I do think it's hilarious, though, that he could do that reframing, but failure is such a gross thing for us humans that he didn't want to admit that was what was happening. Now here's the big caveat. You can do all the reframing you want, but if you don't learn anything from your mistakes, then you actually are wasting your time. To learn from your mistakes, you can't sweep them under the rug. You need to live with them for a little while, and you have to tell people about them. You keeping that gained knowledge to yourself is going to keep you from growing from the experience. The hardest part of my job is admitting when I failed to find a solution and I have to ask for help. I still struggle with my pride every time, and that's okay. Being a work in progress is a shared experience. Even in last week's sprint, I hated making it known that I was stuck on tickets and needed help. When I was a junior, it would take me days to admit that I needed help. I wanted so badly to prove that I could do my job. But it was part of becoming a senior where I realized that was my job. My job was to fail fast, to venture out into the wilderness of what was possible and what wasn't possible, to fail as quickly as possible so we could get on to failing at the next thing. It was how progress got made. Minds coming together to find a solution where previously there was nothing but hypothesis and jumbled data. Getting used to failing and having the grit to keep going are skills I developed over time. It took me a long time to realize how much of a strength this was. It was actually when I got taken aside by that project manager I told you about in the beginning of the talk and told how much of an impact me sharing my failure made that made me realize this is a skill I need to hone. Frequent, repeated failures are often where I learn the most. I like to use test-driven development to help me understand what I'm trying to solve. I may not know what I need to do to fix it, but I know 100% I can break it. Starting from a place of failure gives me a freedom I wouldn't have otherwise. Because they're already broken and I know that, there's less risk to my experiments, and with TDD, I can just run my spec over and over again until the pieces start to come together. Now, to help you put the pieces together, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Shana Moore.
Okay. Hello? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Kate, for the kind words. If we're going to encourage you to fail fast, we'd like to send you home with some practical tips for how to handle error messages. We know that they can be frustrating and stressful, especially as a junior dev, due to lack of experience, fear of failure, lack of confidence, time pressure, some of the things that Kate has already mentioned. Also, it might not help that many of the error messages you'll see are the color red, and that may trigger flashbacks to negative experiences like the one Cuppy's going through. But you should know that they're red to stand out, get your attention, and ultimately to help. Stop signs are red for the same reason, so could you imagine a world without them? My guess it'd be a little bit more chaotic than usual, especially if you live in a city. So instead of being scared of them, let's embrace them, treat them as learning opportunities, and I'll cover 9 ideas. The first seems kind of obvious. Doesn't always happen though, but make sure you read and understand the error message. What is it trying to tell you? Sometimes if you pay close enough attention, the solution is in the error message. So in this example, something went wrong when I called shuffle on an array of fruits. The purple is the error type. The green, is it advancing? Yes, okay. The green is the error message, and the yellow is the Ruby interpreter offering a suggestion with a did you mean statement. So I received a no method error, shuffly does not exist. Did you mean shuffle? And yes, I did, and that was really simple, but also very helpful. I just had a typo, which honestly is really easy to miss. Second, we want to identify the source of the error. And so one of my favorite parts of an error message is that oftentimes they come with a stack trace. And a stack trace is a report displaying sequences of function calls that led up to the exception. And they contain a lot of helpful information such as the file and the line number of where the exception occurred. So in this Pig Latin converter program called Pigit, I got a no method error when I ran this program. Looking at this, the no method error says undefined method split for the number 42, an integer. Yeah, okay. Looking at this stack trace, I can see that the error occurred on line 3 of the Pigit file in a method called Pigit. Using tips we'll discuss later, I learned that the method split is a Ruby method for a string. It can't be used on an integer. So if you could remember this example, we will be revisiting it soon. In this example, I hope to better illustrate the sequence of function calls and a stack trace. So I received a runtime error when I ran this program because I intentionally am raising an error just for demonstration purposes. But if you look back at the stack trace, we can see that method C was called by line 6 of method B, called by line 2 of method A, and ultimately it was called on line 13 of the main program. And if you could remember this example too, we will see it again soon. So far, all of my examples have been very simple and contrived, so let's take a look at a real one. What do you do when you get a stack trace that looks like this? Your reaction might look like this. So the best thing that you can do is to slow down and read it carefully. I received this error when I ran seeds in a Rails application. The task aborted due to a type error. Can you spot the offending line? It's here, and a heuristic to help you find it is to look for where the lines change from the bundled gems to where the lines start with app. And that's under the assumption that the error is coming from your application. So bear with me as we take a closer look at this particular error. On this In this error, we can see that it occurred in the decorate works type method on line 11 of the child indexer RB file in a gem called IIIF print that I had cloned to my vendor directory for local development. And that's a lot of information that's very helpful and such a time saver. So when we say that error messages are our friends, this is exactly what we mean, and we should be grateful for them instead of scared. Okay, I wanted to include this example because as a Rails developer, you'll likely see or have seen this error page a lot. In fact, Kate shared one earlier, and as a junior dev, I totally took this error page for granted. I didn't realize how jam-packed of helpful information it contained, and it's also interactive, which you'll see in the video on the next slide. So starting from the top, it tells you that we have an error type, and it tells you the controller and action that it came from. It also tells you, or in this particular case, that this happened on line 11 in a partial called sidebar. It will give you the error message. It also includes a did you mean statement, which was helpful the first time, but in this case, I didn't mean that. But also, the error message is helpful because it says undefined method, foo, for a user type object. Then we have the extracted source section, and this is like the snippet. It highlights where the actual error occurred. I will also refer to this sometimes as the context. Next, we have the tracer templates, which from this example, I can see that the dashboard is responsible for rendering the sidebar partial. We've got the root of the application. This part is the exciting bit in my opinion because it's interactive. So you can click on each link, which I'll show you in a second. It will unfold the stack trace, and you can click on each point at the stack trace to unfold the context and see what was happening with your code at that particular stack trace. Yeah, you'll see. Then there's a section about, this is the request parameters, the response. There's also a response section, but unfortunately I cut it off in this screenshot. And the black box on the bottom is used for debugging. It's like a console that's used for debugging, which we'll also talk about soon. So this is the interactivity that I'm trying to demonstrate, the TLDR of this slide. And I probably won't time it correctly, but as you can see, when I click on different points of the stack trace, I can see what's happening in my code at that time. I also include an example for how this page will look like if you have a routing error, because it's also very helpful. From there, you'll be able to filter and search for like all the routes that are available in your application. It includes the route helper, available HTTP verbs, the path and controller and actions that's responsible for it. So again, TLDR, the error page is like very, very helpful. And I highly encourage you to play around with it next time you see one. Okay, for debugging tools. As Rails developers, we have several options. Some popular ones include Pry, Bybud, Web Console, and built-in debugger. Debugging tools allow us to set breakpoints at specific points of our program, which means that the program is going to pause at that time. And from there, you can execute your code line by line. You can inspect variables and values along the way. So revisiting this Pig Latin program, remember that I got a no method error. Previously, we were able to follow the stack trace and figure it out. On line 25, I passed an integer instead of a string. But let's pretend I didn't know this so we can have an opportunity to use a debugger. So the first thing I do is set a breakpoint near the offending line, which I would get from the stack trace. And then I would start my program. Personally, for me, the first thing I would be interested in is to inspect the param that's coming in, str. str usually is short for string, and when I asked for its value, I got the number 42, and that might be my first clue, like, something is not right here. But the next thing I could do is play the line that it actually failed at, and so I could use the keyword next to do that, but instead I used play L, and number 6 to execute that line, which revealed the error that we saw earlier. Play-L stands for play line, and that's a Pry-specific tool. It's nice because you can play one line or you could play like a bunch of lines, and I use it a lot. But the point of that is to say, I recommend you find a debugging tool that you really like, learn it well, and so that your debugging can be the most efficient. Okay, revisiting this simple stack trace program, I'd like to take a moment to share with you 4 of my favorite debugging methods. So I'm going to set the breakpoint in method C, where the exception is, and start the program. The first method is caller, and that will be used to generate the stack trace report, as we've seen earlier. I know it's been hard to read, so hopefully you can see, but in this stack trace example, I can see that method C was called by method B, called by method A, and so on. The next one is one that Eileen actually mentioned in her keynote, and I was really excited about that because it's a method I use all the time, and that's source location. And in this example, you might not see the value of it because we can clearly see the code in front of us, but imagine you're in a big application with lots of files, you have no idea where anything is defined. That's where source location comes in. So in this example, I called it on method C, and I can see the file and line number that it was defined on. The next example is Pry-specific again, but I thought it was worth mentioning because I do use it a lot, and that's a method called source. And it's similar to source location, but instead of returning like where it is located, it returns the method definition itself. So if I were to type puts and called source on method A, it would return the contents of the magenta box you see. Do you see a magenta box? Okay, thank you. And the last one is backtrace. Backtrace is helpful when you're rescuing exceptions to produce the stack trace for that particular error. Okay, hopefully y'all are still with me. We are nearly halfway there. The next 3 points can be lumped under a common problems checklist, if you will. I would argue that they're going to be the most frequent issues you'll run into as a junior or a new programmer. However, spoiler alert, a lot of the issues as a senior, a lot of the issues that I encounter can also be traced back to one of these 3 points. The first one is not so bad though, because if you have a syntax error, your Ruby code will not run. But it can also be really frustrating because it's easy to miss. So does anyone have experience of like just staring at a problem, trying to figure out what's wrong, and then you just figure out that you're just missing a comma? Definitely. So to avoid this, you want to use a good text editor or IDE, an integrated development environment, or a plugin that highlights your syntax errors as you type. So in this example, you should see that I got an error when I ran this program. The program didn't run, and it tells me I have a syntax error, and the error is actually pretty helpful. But I didn't need to get that far because I used VS Code, and it highlights my syntax errors as I type. So in this case, I am missing a closing parenthesis, and it's letting me know with a red highlight. And in the bottom example, there's no more red highlights, so you can see that I fixed the problem and I'm able to run the program again successfully. Incorrect inputs and outputs are another common source of errors. So this example is an add numbers program. It should return the sum of 2 arguments. But when I ran it, it caused a type error. The error says string can't be coerced into an integer. You may see my mistake on line 7 because I passed 2 different data types. I passed an integer and a string. So on line 4, when I'm trying to add it together, that's what caused the error. But let's pretend we didn't know that, remember that error, and we'll research it later soon. But what if I made a logic mistake that impacted the output of my code? For some reason, I wasn't paying attention, and in my add numbers method, I wrote a minus b instead of a plus b. So when I called it on line 7, I passed it 5 and 5, I would expect the method to return 10. But in this case, it returned 0, and unfortunately, it didn't give me any error messages at all, even though it could cause a serious bug in my application with real-life consequences. So could you imagine depositing your hard-earned money into a bank that had this kind of error? You'd be quite concerned when checking your account's balance. So even if your code is syntax-free, runs without crashing, your inputs look good, it's still possible to have logical errors that cause unexpected behaviors in your program, and unfortunately, your interpreter, Ruby interpreter, will still run it. A common strategy to catch logical errors and output errors early on is to use TDD, test-driven development, which is something that Kait mentioned earlier. But this is a practice where we will write our tests first, then our code. And this ensures that our programs behave exactly how we expect it. So in my example, I wrote my spec here. I want add numbers 5 and 5 to return 10. Then I ran the spec and I received an error intentionally because in my program, I actually didn't write any logic at all. The next step would be to write the minimal amount of code possible to make the spec pass. So I did that by typing A plus B and then rerunning the program, and it passes. And with this type of workflow, I definitely would have caught that output and logic error from before. Okay, so you've got a particularly hard and confusing error message. Now's the time where you can search for online resources for guidance. There's plenty of online forums, blogs, and documentation sites. Some popular choices include Stack Overflow and various documentation for languages, frameworks, and gems. I would recommend to not just copy and paste it though, try to genuinely understand your code. When you find a solution, you should be asking yourself, is this relevant to my use case? If you're reading documentation, be sure you're reading about the correct version. And oftentimes your success here will come down to how well you're able to Google. Okay. Another thing that you can try is new and exciting, and that's the AI tools. I will preface this by saying that I don't have much experience with GitHub's Copilot. I actually just got access to it. So because of that, I'm going to focus my example on ChatGPT. But Copilot is kind of cool, pretty cool, because it's designed for developers and it knows the context of your code. ChatGPT is designed for more general use and for conversational applications. I'm still learning the best ways to use it and ask questions. So unfortunately, I can't see the slide anymore, but you should see the error that we saw previously. I asked Chat, what does this error mean? Oh, it's a string can't be coerced into an integer error, I believe. And when I asked that, I quickly received a helpful response that might have, encouraged me to figure out what I needed to do. So ChatGPT is a potentially valuable tool to get guidance on various issues, but it would be remiss of me to not mention a few cautions here too. So the first one is to not treat it as a source of truth because it can be wrong. And personally, for me right now, I'm most comfortable sticking to asking it questions. Be very careful about just copying and pasting your code into ChatGPT because there is a terms of use that says that they can use your conversation to train its AI models. So when you see those headlines of companies' data getting leaked from employees using ChatGPT, that's what's happening. So as a general rule of thumb, just don't ever put any private or sensitive data in there. And actually, Josh Puetz had a really interesting talk yesterday that I'd recommend if you can, I don't know, the bot's available yet. He covers some best practices for pair programming with AI. And then also, my friend sat on a panel with me yesterday. His name is Eric Guzman. He's a Twitch streamer and a YouTuber. He has some really interesting content about how to use a Copilot on his channel that I would recommend you check out. Okay, so we're almost done. You tried all the things by now, but you still don't have a solution. So now would be the time I would recommend that you step away from your computer, just take a break. But if you come back and you're still stuck, be humble and ask for help. This is a time that you want to share your error message with your dev team. So for my company, we are remote and we created a Slack engineering channel just for this purpose. And I love it because over time, it has become a repository of questions from everyone on the team. And you never know, someone on the team may have already experienced what you're going through and can quickly start a huddle and y'all can figure it out. So in this example, I asked a question and my lovely co-presenter, Kait, in the thread, you can see that my lovely co-presenter, Kait, responded offering to be a second pair of eyes, which a lot of times that's all you need. But when you find the solution to your question, I highly recommend that you end the thread with a solved or some kind of keyword that lets you know you have the solution. Basically, just leave yourself some breadcrumbs because this saves a lot of time when someone else encounters this error and finds your question in thread, helps them to solve it a lot quicker. And a lot of times that someone is you. So if you don't do it for your other people, do it for yourself. And then not to mention, there's something very special about the documentation process when we take a moment to write down what we've learned while something's still fresh in our brains. It just lets the learning sink in a little bit further. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. And hopefully by now we've empowered you with the right mindset and tools for you to create a troubleshooting framework of your own that'll help you embrace the failures and challenges that come along with being a developer. And in doing so, you will become more confident, skilled, and successful in your work. Your programs will become more robust and reliable. And your customers and team will be happier too with the high quality code and growth-minded attitude you'll deliver. Thanks.
Yeah. So now we've got some time for Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? So what I would do is, oh, right. So we were going to do this thing where we repeat the question so everyone heard it. So the question basically is, if you're working with an older version of Rails and it isn't an up-to-date code base, how do you find the documentation you need? What I would do is I would go to the Rails guides and find the specific version of Rails I was working with, go through how things are built in that version, or go to GitHub and find, like, let's say it's not Rails and it's an old gem, I would go to GitHub and make sure like the version I'm looking at of the code is actually the version that I'm working with. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at the wrong like main and it has nothing to do with the version that I actually need, because things have changed over time. So check your versions, make sure you're looking for documentation that's specific to your version. And sometimes you can find old documentation in old Medium articles if you search for the version that you're working with. What do you think, Shana?
Yeah, that, but when you're Googling, include the version that you're working with. So you'll likely stumble upon what you're actually looking for.
So the question is, let's say you're a senior developer and you want to help a junior developer, but you don't want to hand them the answer. So what I do is I bite my tongue. It is real hard to not just, you want to share the information, you want them to get better, you want to go through things quickly, but they are going to retain more if they find the answer themselves. So you want to set them up for success. You want to make sure that they have the problem-solving skills to get there. So what I usually do is I hold their hand while we walk through that problem-solving process. I stick with them through every Google search, and until they come up with the answer on their own, I don't leave. So that's what I usually do. What about you, Shana?
Yeah, I don't know what the saying, I'm going to butcher it, but like when you teach a man how to fish, it's like more valuable. So especially if we were speaking about mentoring yesterday, that sometimes I might not even know the answer myself, but I have developed the skills over time to be able to find the answer. And that sometimes is honestly kind of more valuable than actually knowing the answer. So if you can share that wisdom and your process with junior devs, I was going to say something else too, but unfortunately, I don't remember. So start there.
Going once? All right. Well, thank you again for coming to our talk. Once again, we work for SoftServe by Scientist.com. If you want to work with us, feel free to reach out. And take care. Enjoy the conference. Thank you.